And now we're going to go to a panel of people who are bringing the outdoors into classrooms and classrooms into the outdoors. So Ryan.
It's exciting. All right, I'm going to be switching hats a little bit here, but I'm going to first introduce our moderator, the talented Lauren Pyle. Lauren is with the Environmental Educators in North Carolina. She is their executive director. She is also my co-chair for the day. I feel lucky to have been able to work alongside her. She is going to be moderating our next panel called Making the Grade, Building Outdoor Recreation into Classroom Environments. And like I said, we're going to start in the classroom. We're going to move towards opportunities beyond the classroom. And then obviously we're going to talk about workforce after that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lauren Pyle to take over our first session of the day.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Hey, everybody joining from home or work, wherever you are. We're so excited to have you here for this next section, which is really going to talk and dive into the connection between outdoor recreation, outdoor activities, and formal classrooms, right? Because we can't talk about kids in the outdoors without talking about the school piece. And we are joined for the next chunk of time here by 4 amazing people doing doing work in this space, right? Who are bringing that connection between the outdoors and the classroom. And so throughout this entire experience, what we're going to do is I'm going to have everybody briefly introduce themselves, and then it's going to become a conversation. We're going to be talking about some of the things that they think are important to share, but we want to hear from you all. And so during this presentation today, if you're watching on a live stream through the Hoover app, please drop your questions into the Q&A section. We want to get to those to be able to have that opportunity so that you can ask your questions of our speakers today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to them for introductions. So they'll go one at a time. You'll get to hear from everybody, and then we'll jump right in. And so I think to start, we'll go with Charissa Jones. So Charissa, are you ready?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charissa Jones. Most people call me Charzy in case Lauren calls me that. I am calling from Corvallis, Oregon, where I work for the Oregon Outdoor School Program, which is associated with Oregon State University Extension Program. I'm the Outreach and Inclusion Coordinator for this program, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about what we've been doing in Oregon and how you could possibly think about transferring some of our lessons into your state.
Awesome. Thank you, Charzy. Next up, we'll hear, let's go from Allie.
Hi, everyone. Allie Jeney here, coming to you from Science Adventure School at West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia. I'm excited to talk about Science Adventure School today. We're a 4-day, 3-night, overnight camping program. We bring 6th grade students in as they're starting their middle school years with their teachers. And we really hit on 3 main topics of curriculum during their 4 days, 3 nights with us. The first is actually, you'll meet Andrew Hoover in a second. It's his program, Science Behind the Sport. So we take adventure sports and physical science education. We also do a lot of environmental education, and that is a much different, it's an inquiry-based approach. And we really let the students lead lessons in that area. And we also have a positive youth development set, and that's really what brings it all together. So if a student is rock climbing, for example, we're going to process that rock climbing unit, not just learn about the rocks and learn about the sports behind it. We're going to talk about when you're done, how that experience was for you and how you can translate some of the lessons you learned back in the classroom. And then in the evenings, we sit down and we have those campfire discussions and tie it all together so that we're not just talking about things like science identity, positive self-talk units. We're just focusing on helping students succeed by building their characteristics as well, like persistence, social self-efficacy, belongingness, and that all happens through putting those 3 units all together over those 4 days. So hopefully we can talk about how we can pick bits and pieces apart and apply that to whoever out there is listening in your programs.
Awesome, thanks. Let's go from Andrew, the other side of that story there.
Hello. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Just wanted to start by offering a quick appreciation. Just wanted to say thanks. We've been looking forward to this for a really long time and feeling super excited and stoked to be here as a participant on this panel. My name's Andrew Hoover. I'm a friend and colleague of Allie at WVU, working out of what's become the greater umbrella of our university's Outdoor Economic Development Collaborative. The program I oversee specifically is called the Science Behind the Sport. So it was developed and it's dedicated to providing outreach and STEM-based education to K-12 students and educators throughout our state. So we interact with public school students and then folks from many different youth serving organizations. So we do a lot of work with groups like the Scouts, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, with 4-H, with different programs like NICA, and then other different community-based organizations. To date, we've developed 6 different curricular areas that all involve outdoor recreational type sports. And so namely, those are cycling, rock climbing, skateboarding, archery, and paddling. In the future, we plan to develop this out a bit further, and we'll expand to include 4 others. So in total, we'll have 10 different adventure sports that we've tied and found complementing principles of STEM to relate to those. Essentially, the way that our program operates is that we offer a series of different lessons that are designed to take fundamental principles and to teach them and apply them through the lens of outdoor adventure sports. And so we do that by traveling the state, interacting with thousands, and in the course of a BSA National Jamboree, tens of thousands of youth annually, by way of classroom visits, professional development workshops for teachers. We also host groups on campus. We're fortunate in that we have an outdoor adventure center with low ropes and high ropes challenge courses. We actually believe are one of the only universities that owns and operates its own canopy tour, a zipline canopy tour. We also have a climbing wall, and then also fantastic access to all sorts of different biking opportunities in and around the Morgantown community. Additionally, partner and program out of and facilitate program offerings through many different of the partnering organizations, venues in and around the state. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And Ryan, I know we've gotten to meet you already as our MC for the day, but what else would you like to tell us about Muddy Sneakers to sort of frame this discussion?
Well, Muddy Sneakers, again, founded here in North Carolina in the wake of Richard Louve's Last Child in the Woods being published. And really, we have an interesting background in that we had camp owners and conservationists sort of coming together and saying, here we are in a part of the world with just immense natural resources and really a state that has just a plethora of places to go, local protected lands in close proximity to schools. And yet these kids are just not getting outside. There's a lot of concern about screen time, et cetera. And so we ended up working with public schools to reach the widest audience we could. It's never without some challenges, but we embrace those challenges. We think it's important, particularly in a time when we're trying to build the most diverse audience we can. It took us a couple years, but we focused in on 5th grade. Anybody who works with kids will tell you that 5th grade is a pretty magical year. And so I can speak to that more, but we've sort of determined that our role is to kind of be experts in that 10 to 12-year-old age range. We work during the school year, and every school that participates in Muddy Sneakers is a partner. And it's a very deep partnership. We think it's a unique model in that way. We're focused on really small group instruction, never more than 12-to-1 instructor ratio. We're focused on keeping kids close. So ideally, they're going to see multiple different properties over the course of the year or lands within 30 minutes of their school campus. Some of those might be state, federal, municipal owned, maybe a land trust house those. And then we also do some programming on their schoolyard. That was out of a time of the last recession, kind of a crisis. We learned that, hey, this helps bring down our costs some, but in that time we learned, wow, what an amazing resource to open up the children's eyes to realize like what's right out their door. And we've always sort of referred to our program as a backyard program. It's local, it's focused on the local, not the exotic. But Muddy Sneakers was built to be a replicable model. And so maybe as we go on today, I can speak a little bit more about that and the challenges that have come with testing this model into different areas.
Awesome, thank you. And for everybody tuning in at home, you're going, wait, everybody on this panel is 5th and 6th grade. Yes, you're right. But that's what we decided to focus on, is to actually dive into one specific age and show you some very different ways the schools are engaging in the outdoors, and that their partners are engaging with those schools. And so what we want to start with today is just an opening framing question to hear from our panelists. Why do you think it's important to incorporate outdoor recreation into classroom settings? Who wants to start on that one?
Well, I'm happy to take a stab being the first one. I know I saw those looks on everyone's faces. I think it's a number of reasons. For me, I think the biggest thing is that it's a great equalizer, if that makes sense. When you're in the outdoors, whether you're recreating or you're learning, it is the first big step towards everyone being on the same page. It doesn't matter the equipment you have or what your grades are like. If it's raining, we're all getting wet. And I think that is the first cool thing, that when you go outside with a group of people, there's this automatic bond that brings the cohort together. Certainly we can get into more topics like the ideas around risk, and higher perceived risk means that we're going to build better bonds quicker when you feel like you need to rely on the people around you. And it's also hands-on learning. And so I'm sure as educators in the audience, you know that there are a lot of learning styles, and the outdoor learning typically helps us access more students because we're serving more learning styles at the same time. I think there's a long list, but those are some of my favorite that truly, it really puts everyone on the same page, and it's exciting, right? We're outside and not inside, so of course.
And I'm happy to jump in on that one too. I think right now, non-formal educators like all of us play a really important role in making sure that maybe it's environmental ed, maybe it's outdoor recreation, but that the outdoors are a part of the traditional school experience. In some places, I want to give a shout out to Oregon, and part of the reason, why we have this geographically diverse panel is because there's some awesome work happening in some states that we all need to take notice of, Oregon being one of them. But I think it's up to organizations like us to also help prove the value. And for us, we've committed to doing multiple days, because we do think that it sort of takes that for the schools and the teachers to buy in, that this supplemental program, because it's supplemental science, at least that's what we're doing and focused on, we're not a replacement for what the teachers do. But what you can do inside a classroom will always be limited, period. The kids that are going to succeed in a classroom is going to be limited. We know this, and the trends are heading the opposite direction from saying it's okay to just assume that we can make this space work. So I think it's really important for us. I mean, as partners with our local public lands, we've got an opportunity to really showcase what's in a community. But I think it's critical, that idea of like a child finishing their education with a sense of place is largely not on the table. So if we're going to play, if we think that's important, and I hope most of us on this call today do, we have a role, to play, not only our organizations, but all those that support our organizations.
I'd like to piggyback up on that sense, the idea of a sense of place. So one of our mottos for the Oregon Outdoor School program is that we're taking students into the world's best classroom, which is the outdoors. And part of that is to ensure that we're helping students create stronger connections, not only to the places where they are from, so maybe where they live, but if they go to outdoor school in any other place in Oregon, to start connecting what's happening in terms of natural resources, how that connects back to the outdoor economy and the natural resource economy, and what does that mean for them as they're living and as their families are living and taking part of the land. That's a really important part for us. And so when I think about connecting that back to a classroom environment, not understanding the land that you're on or the land that you're taking resources from, it really creates a disassociation to the importance of the natural spaces. And so we are trying to get back to that, and not only what we think is important, but also allowing for space for students to bring in their own cultural backgrounds and lived experiences, and making sure that our outdoor school program is culturally responsive. So for some of our communities, agriculture is big. And traditionally, environmental education has not looked at agriculture or forestry or any of that in a favorable light. And so how do we talk about those industries when we're bringing up outdoor school and making sure that those perspectives are coming in, and we are not automatically bringing them in a negative light, but talking about holistically, how do these industries help us in everyday life? What is happening within those industries as they're looking at more sustainability methods, and all of that comes into play when we're talking about our programming.
Okay, I'm going to close this out with just a brief thought on this question. So why is it important to incorporate outdoor rec into the classroom? I believe that it's important because it offers the transformative opportunity to engage students in lifelong activities, right? And I'm a product of that. I didn't start recreating in the outdoors until I was an adult. So I guess you could say I'm an anomaly to the system. But I think there's a lot of truth in the fact that, much like STEM education, the earlier you can introduce it, the more impactful and the greater retention there will be.
And I feel like it's more accessible that way. And that's what, our department tries to do with the Economic Development Collaborative is, if we build these relationships early, like Andrew was saying, that builds an entire community who focuses and is excited about outdoor rec. And so ultimately is going to help support the larger economics around outdoor recreation when we build a cohort of young people who aren't scared of it because they didn't grow up looking at the climbers in the New River Gorge being scared, but they learned about it early. So that's a great point, Andrew.
Yeah, and all of you are bringing up these pieces that you have seen, you have observed, that you notice about your programs and the participants who come through your programs. But one of the things I think is really exciting is that the research is catching up. There is now validated data to say that there is a strong connection and a lot of supports, everything from academic support to socio-emotional development, to physical development, to leadership and 21st century skills. And so I think all of you have touched on that in different capacities of these real and tangible benefits of connecting the outdoors in our formal education settings. And so now I want to dive in a little bit to some of the specifics of your programs. So Ryan, I know you and I have talked because we're both based here in North Carolina. We've kind of understood your journey, right? As Muddy Sneakers, that you started in Brevard, which is a really small town here in Western North Carolina, like 10 minutes from my house. And has expanded across the state and are continuing to expand. But you and I have talked that there's not this one size fits all model when we talk about connecting outdoor recreation and classrooms and outdoor education in classrooms. What are some of the things that you're noticing about talking points or needs for different relationships in different areas?
Sure. Muddy Sneakers has had an interesting journey. Like I said, it was always built to be a replicable model. But it wasn't until we were able to sell the state on that we really had the ability to test it. And just because we were testing it, right, didn't mean it was going to be a guaranteed fit. I like to think that we weren't heading into that process blind, to think that we could just cut and paste, and that things that were working a couple hours, 2-3 hours to the west in the mountains, we're going to work 2 to 3 hours to the east. So the area we're serving, if you're familiar with North Carolina, is just east of Charlotte, south of Winston-Salem, Greensboro, this really cool, beautiful area, Yadkin River, Uwharrie Mountains, some of the oldest mountains in the world, but not necessarily an area that is known for having, outdoor science education, environmental education in the schools. And we knew that. And you kind of don't know till you go, partly, but I would, my advice would be, if you're an organization that's thinking about taking your model on the road, so to speak, and really you can break it down and say, well, what you guys did was almost kind of start all over. And in some ways we did. We did not form a new board. We didn't have a different, home office or executive director for down in that area. But we realized very soon after we began, and we probably should have started earlier, that we needed an advisory council. And that advisory council has paid dividends as far as like really understanding and better understanding the landscape of the multiple counties we're serving down there or over there. But I would say that really taking the time, and it's not going to be probably a few months. It's probably a year process. And it almost was for us. We were moving a little bit quicker because we had to, based on funding. But like to really get to know that community and making sure that you're finding a community that has enough philosophical alignment with this work. I mean, I'm all about the uphill challenge, but in Rowan County, where Salisbury's based, they were bought in. They were ready, and they were ready to kind of help be a leader for a region. And that region, we've had great interest, and we've had some schools come in and out, but I think we've learned a lot in that time frame. We had questions and concerns about the work that we do that we never had in almost a decade of work in the West. So to say we were blindsided a little bit is true, but I think it's a really healthy process to go in. It's also about hiring the right people, right? Making sure as much as you can that you're hiring educators. Even if your admin team doesn't totally fit that, you're hiring educators from that region. I think that creates a local feel to the work, and making sure that the schools feel like you're speaking their same language. And the last thing I would just say is, local partnerships are huge. We didn't go in and immediately assume nobody was doing this work. Like, don't go in blind. One of the first things we did, there was a local science center, Horizons. They do a great job down there. We went and met with them first. How can we complement? How can this be a rising tide if we come to the area? Should we be in the area? There's more work that needs to be done, but there's some areas that are sort of saturated with this work, and a lot of great groups trying to do their best. And so I just encourage to try to find those niches. And really, some people ask me, why did you go to Salisbury and not a major economic center to try to grow your program? And that reason is, and I'll just make a shout out for this, I think there's reason to do this work in the urban areas and the rural areas. But ironically, the rural areas often have the most natural amenities, the least logistical challenges, traffic, sprawl, et cetera, and often don't get the same prioritization for a lot of reasons. The funders are in the cities, typically. We have populations in cities that have been targeted as like super high need. Well, there's a lot of high need in the rural communities too. And you'd be amazed. Let's not assume that our rural communities are more connected. If there's anything we've learned in the last 13 years, is that our rural communities are not more connected just because they're next door to the resources.
Oh, and that's an awesome point, Ryan. I used to do programming for a huge portion of 8th graders in my community when I used to be a frontline educator. And we would work with a phenomenal percentage of them, of the 8th graders in our county, doing freshwater ecology. And half of those kids had never been in a creek before, which, if you're familiar with Western North Carolina, is amazing because you have to actively avoid that experience. There's one at the bottom of every gully. And so, like, they're all over the place. There's water. And so it's one thing if you're coming from, the Southwest, you're coming from the high desert, the experience you haven't had. But even just to see that connection, I think is so powerful. So thank you for that. And then speaking of this, like, you have to grow it, right? And it's different in different places. Charissa, you're joining us from Oregon. There is a state mandate in Oregon that every 5th and 6th grader gets to experience outdoor school. I would love to see that here in North Carolina. And I'm sure we have people on the call who are like, what is that? And how can we make that happen? But for states that are dreaming about doing this, what are some of the outcomes or impacts that y'all have seen of having outdoor school for every child?
So just to give a little bit of background, because I will say, like, it has been really exciting here for the last 5 or 6 years leading up to getting statewide funding. But outdoor school has been a program in Oregon for over 60 years. So it was 60 years of long, hard work of passionate leaders and stakeholders all coming together and saying, we really need to make sure that there is support, statewide support, to ensure that every single fifth or sixth grade student can go to outdoor school, because prior to that, while it was a quote unquote statewide program, because there was no statewide support or funding, you had larger school districts or regions like the Portland metro area that carries most of the population of Oregon actually having a chance, because they could fundraise that population, whereas our more rural communities were only able to fundraise every few years. So their outdoor school program happened every couple of years, whereas the Portland metro area had outdoor school every single year. So basically a group of passionate people got together and they formed the Oregon Outdoor Education Coalition and lobbied and advocated and went door to door. And in 2015 went together to pass Senate Bill 439 that basically said, where they asked voters, do you support outdoor school? And overwhelmingly, everybody said, yes, we support outdoor school, and we think that every student should have an opportunity to have outdoor school. And that put together a framework of what outdoor school would look like. It provided the space for Oregon State University Extension to come in as the managing organization for the program. And then a second campaign was put together to ask for funding. And I think that's what really made us successful, because the first question was just, do you support having kids go outdoors? And let's get that out of the way. And then the second question was, okay, how are we going to get students outdoors? How are we going to support them? And should we use Oregon lottery funds to support outdoor school? And overwhelmingly, 67% of Oregonians said yes. I believe 34 out of our 36 counties passed that and said, yes, we need to have funding support for outdoor school, which has led to up to $22 million of lottery money being every year for outdoor school. And so what we've seen through that is more students participating across the board. So with our 2020, 2021 applications that were brought in, I think about 43,000 students have signed up via their schools or their school districts for outdoor school. It's also meant that we have a program in place to look at our curriculum. So we don't have a one size fits all. It's very culturally responsive, so it meets the needs of the schools, the regions that the outdoor school programs are happening in. And we're helping offer support and partnership with our Oregon Natural Resources Education Program for training of our EE providers and our teachers to ensure that they offer high quality curriculum. We are reaching out to our 9 federally recognized tribal communities to make sure that we are being intentional about putting in the history of tribal communities of Oregon into our curriculum, and not the appropriative ways that have happened in the past when we talk about outdoor education in general and how we take from tribal communities and their histories and their traditions. We've also seen, so for us, one of the biggest things is with the OSU Outdoor School program. We've been here for about 4 years. We lead with equity, because we've seen that it's not outdoor school. It's been around for 60 years, but it's not always been equitable. So we have communities who have not participated, who have been historically marginalized. Just like Ryan said, rural communities where they're in those rural areas where there's a lot of nature spaces and they're not participating either. So what about the previous templates of outdoor school have made it inaccessible for them? And then not more importantly, but another aspect that has been erased is disabilities in the outdoors. Outdoor spaces are not accessible. And so we're looking at how are we ensuring that when we say every student, we have students with various disabilities, and what does that look like? So we brought together communities. We have an advisory committee as well that represents different parts of Oregon and different identity groups to talk about how can we intentionally ensure that we're not talking about outdoor school that is like all are welcome, which is more of an assimilist kind of way of viewing programming, and more of this was created with you in mind. And how do we create an outdoor school program with the individual and unique identities of our students in mind? How do we bring those communities in? How are we reacting to those communities if they are a little bit apprehensive at first because we haven't really been coming from that space? And what does it mean to actually put our money where our mouth is? So we pay for, we let schools know that we will pay for their paraprofessionals to go. So if you have students who in a regular class have somebody helping them, we pay for those professionals to come in so that student has that support. We have paid for adaptive gear so that students can have the same experience or equivalent as their classmates. We make sure that is a part of it, that if that's what your student needs to succeed, that's what needs to happen in outdoor school. So all of those things are things we're thinking about.
Yeah, and it's really powerful. You also have this really deep and I think nation-leading evaluation approach. And that goes through all these programs, right? Is that this whole like feel good, I promise it does good things, is backed up by like, yes, and it makes a difference. And so Allie and Andrew, I want to spin it to you all with WVU, because your programs all have this really strong STEM. Well, if you haven't heard that word, it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics focus. Why do you think it's important to have these strong formal education standards in your programming? Why was that included as part of your design?
Thank you for that question, Lauren. I'll get us started here. I'll get us warmed up, and then I'll hand it off to Allie to clean up shop wherever I end up leaving it. Okay, why is STEM important? So I think there's both a short answer and a long answer to that. So STEM, the short answer, the simple answer, STEM's important because it pervades every single part of our everyday lives. You know, we're completely surrounded by STEM, whether we like it or not, you know, whether we draw or focus our attention and our energy on it or not, it's there. And it's such a cool and unique opportunity to bring that to life for students. And so to delve a bit further into the long answer, I think that it's heavily rooted, of course, in research. So bear with me, I'm gonna share some stats and figures. I don't know all these like the back of my hand, so a bit I'll be referencing, but kind of the framing around STEM is that although I think it started much before the 2000s, it really peaked in the early 2000s. You know, it was the hot topic. It was by all means the hashtag that was trending on everybody's education timelines. And so the National Science Foundation, they jumped on it first. In 2010, in 2001, that is, they introduced the acronym of STEM, which by now it's like in many ways, like it's its own word. Like you don't even have to define it. You know, folks are just so aware and so familiar with what STEM is. But anyways, back to the research. At that time, the NSF found that across the board, whether it was elementary, middle, or high school, that students, they were failing. So less than 50% were proficient in math and science. It's alarming. Even more worrisome is that the Department of Education stated that only around 16% of high school seniors were interested in pursuing STEM careers. Other literature supports this by saying that students think that STEM is boring, it's difficult, it's unwelcoming, and that it's just not relevant. A few others. In 2015, there was a report for the Program of International Student Assessment that ranked the U.S. As 38th out of 71 countries in math and 24th out of those same 71 countries in science. But ironically, at that same time, there was a projection that STEM jobs and STEM careers were to be increasing at a rate that was 1.7 times faster than other non-STEM positions. And then lastly, and although you know many of us can attest to this, it's not all about the money, but just to give a scope around that, STEM graduates, as it relates to lifetime earnings, find themselves in a position to where they earn roughly 2/3 more than those in non-STEM jobs. Okay, so to address these national trends, WVU looked inward and we said, what can we do? How can we leverage the resources and the intellectual of the university, and how can we adapt this to facilitate those needs? And so what we developed was a program, Science Behind the Sport, that was to teach STEM through experiential education and having a strong focus on application as it relates to adventure sports. And what I think is important about that is that it levels the playing field. To borrow Allie's word, the equalizer. It becomes the equalizer. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female. It doesn't matter whether you're physically mature or you're intellectually either above or below the curve. None of it matters. What we find is that often these are new activities, and so it presents a whole different set of challenges that students are faced with. And if we can be strategic and integrating just a tinge of education, it develops a kind of a platform and an atmosphere to where the holistic experience is just fun. It's just fun, and that's what it's all about. If we can present it in such a way that it's fun, to where students will often not even realize that they're learning anything at all. And then lastly, and then I'll hand the baton off to Allie here. I also think that it's important, back to the literature findings and the research, that we focus on some of the more traditional concepts of STEM, is the whole relevancy piece. So kids think it's boring, they don't think that it's translatable or relevant to what they're learning. So by tying it in and complementing what they're doing and what they're learning in the classroom, it helps us derive so many different STEM skills, right? So things like creativity, inquiry, critical thinking, logical thinking, even teamwork and different problem solving skills. And that's kind of the beauty of it and kind of what we aim to serve. So with that, Allie, stage is yours. Clean up shop.
No, I don't have anything to clean up, Andrew. You killed it. And you might catch a trend with how WVU programming works, but just like Science Behind the Sport started with the problem, so did Science Adventure School. Our problem was a little bit different, but the answer was very similar. So our problem was, not looking at the national trends, it was looking at West Virginia trends and saying, okay, well, we have a state that needs help in a number of ways, as all of ours does. For West Virginia specifically, though, some of our challenges were things like brain drain. There's a real lack of pursuing education after high school, whether it's trade, associate's, bachelor's. There's really kind of a stop-off point for us. So why aren't students continuing to get education? We have a number of public health issues, so obesity and the addiction crisis. So all kinds of things that we said, well, what can we do now for the state? And a lot of the answer was, well, we've got to get a community and we've got to get folks who understand that science, first of all, it's accessible. It's not something that's necessarily Bill Nye in a lab coat, right? We've got to start with some basic stuff. And a really good way to do that is to take them rock climbing and be like, an engineer, they created that ATC device that you're using to belay, right? So starting to make these connections with students that it's not a lab coat and an Erlenmeyer flask. It's some dude like Andrew riding a mountain bike, teaching you a couple, tricks here and there where centrifugal force starts to make sense. And so that was part of our answer is, well, if we start to make this really accessible, if we get kids excited about this and we let them know that it's part of their everyday life, then maybe we can not just even have them pursue science educations, although we certainly hope that some of them do. It's about building populations that understand that science and outdoor recreation are in the natural resources in their hometowns and their communities. I mean, they're relevant things to think and learn about. They're important things to think and learn about and to pursue after school if that so fits your mold. But if it doesn't, we just need a society that understands these things are important. We need to allocate resources in that direction, which really ties into the economic development piece of things. So for us, it's a pretty big part of our mission to just make the STEM pieces I don't know what you want to say, like take the mystery out, take the far off, that can't be me, I can't do that, take that out of it, and let people know it's just life. It's what we do all the time.
That's great. And Ryan, were you ready?
Yeah, I wanted to say something because we're each coming at it from different methods. And I'm thinking about those that may be watching today that aren't already in academics or aren't non-formal educators, but are thinking my community doesn't have anything like this. Or maybe we have something that's residential, like what's going on in Oregon, but we don't have something in the traditional classroom, or you have one piece of it. I just think it's really important that if you're going to look into trying to grow school day work, that, as I was saying, it's not a one size fits all geographically, culturally. It's also not a one size fits all by the ages. And I know that maybe seems like 101, but we work with fifth grade because it's sort of like the peak of the wonder years. Most would agree with that, somewhere in that 4th to 6th range, right? But it's still those wonder years. Girls will break trends, boys will break trends. Things don't all make sense. When they're kids, they're still very much in this kid mode. And when you get to middle school, things change. And I'm not going to play expert on that, but you just heard from 2 people that are doing a lot of work in middle school. And what I've always learned is that, and heard, is that, you've got a greater desire for recreation. So where we might be doing rotten log studies, we might be building boats and putting them down streams to measure speed, right, with natural materials, et cetera, hanging bear bags. Maybe that transcends to middle school where you are, maybe it doesn't as much. I just want to give a shout out to WVU, because when I first heard about this program, actually through Andy Williamson, I thought, that's it. How cool. Like, you've got to get these kids where they are. And if they're fascinated by these sports, even if they haven't done them, but that adventure piece of it. And by the way, it's not just boys, right? It's a different world today with adventure sports. Like, hit them where they are and just make sure that it's making sense. And I think high school, it even gets more complicated. I won't go there.
But there's opportunities wherever you are, right? So we could have had this same panel with preschool programmers. We could have had the same panel with high school programs. So for those of you who are joining from home or your office, those of you watching in, we've got a little over 10 minutes left. This is your chance to get to pick their brains. So start putting those questions into the chat. Start asking your pieces that you want to know about what are those transferable pieces. And I'm seeing some come up already, thanks to we have some behind the scenes moderators happening. And the first one that's come up is asking really about support, right? Because gear is expensive, y'all, especially when you're talking like, Charissa, you mentioned like the adaptive gear that you need to customize programs. How have y'all received support from outdoor companies and businesses and other ways to help build and provide that resource?
So in Oregon, the program leader for outdoor school, Dr. Chris Elliott, he's been reaching out to different outfitters, Columbia, and asking for discounts or wholesale discounts that we can have. Because of the way that we get the funding, it has to stay with the school district or the provider and doesn't go home with the kids. And that's a comment I make because we also buy jackets and like rain boots because some of our students are lower socioeconomic and you're not going to have fun in outdoor school. If it's right now it's cold. I'm from the tropics, so I think it's cold. So cold and rainy in Oregon, kids are not going to have fun. There are also quite a few programs that have already some of that stuff, or they build it into their programming. And so when they charge the schools, because OSU Outdoor School, the schools apply to us for funding. They tell us how much their program is. We do it by how much program costs per child. And then a lot of the program providers are billing that into their program so that they can keep track of the gear. That's one thing. We also have partnerships with some of our, like the STEM hubs we have in the state. There are 13 STEM partnerships and other organizations like watershed councils that have gear that are sharing and that they're partnering up with different providers. So there's different partnerships that are coming up and that are popping up. And that's one way to look at it, especially if you have not a lot of funding to work with from the start, or the funding that you have access to is smaller, I would say start looking at who can you partner with. And like Ryan said at the beginning, this is not about reinventing the wheel. So if there's somebody who's really good at a certain aspect of your programming or has a lot of gear, see how you can partner with them and what that would look like to build the program up in that way.
And look local, I would say, because when you're first getting going, it's hard to find grants because they want research results and they want all this information that you don't have because you haven't done it yet. And so look to your students, look to your local car dealership. People out there want to help you do amazing things. And it doesn't take big companies. We have a unique challenge in that to do that for us, we have to work through the university. So it's really our local supporters that have helped us get on our feet.
I would challenge the outdoor industry to find more ways. And I would do it, and I mean that, with the utmost respect, but I think, we have a Gear Builders Association in North Carolina. There's a lot of companies that don't have, and I get that, big philanthropic line items, or even a division just to do their philanthropy. Not everybody's Patagonia, and we get that. I think there's a lot of grant opportunities out there, but I would challenge the industry to go another step further, to say, what aren't we doing in our home states? That those gear builders and the different folks that are hubbed out of these states to come together, to be talking about the programs they feel like are moving the needle, not only for their future clients, but for the well-being of the outdoor economy. And I want to, a shout out. We've received grants from the Keen Effect, and we've had great sponsors locally. Another way to do this too is if you're just building those relationships, think about events that those folks would want to sponsor. We host the Mountain Film on Tour when it comes through Asheville, and that's been awesome because yes, that event goes to benefit Muddy Sneakers, but it's also just a cool event that's all about the outdoors with inspiring films, and that's allowed us to start to build relationships with folks like Industry 9 Wheels and others that maybe we wouldn't have been talking to otherwise because their number one priority isn't necessarily 5th grade outdoor science instruction.
Awesome. Thank y'all for that. And the audience is getting you to dig deep on the next one. So what do you see as the future of programs like this? Programs that connect the outdoors and the classroom. Where can this go? What is your vision for that future?
So I'll say the first thing that Oregon Outdoor School has realized is that we have a environmental literacy plan within our state, but it is not mandated or funded. And if we're talking about, and again, we're only 5th and 6th grade, that is a small slice of a student's academic career. If we're talking about making outdoor learning, environmental learning, natural resources learning in general important, having a state environmental literacy plan that is funded, that is mandated, and that is in your Department of Education ensures that all of your natural resource, all of your environmental education programs have access to students in the classroom, so that when something like COVID-19 nobody could have thought about, and as schools scrambled to restructure and to reimagine what schools were going to look like for this year, a lot of environmental programs and even outdoor school were kind of shut out because thinking about moving everything to online and how many hours we were going to have students online, they didn't have the time to think about something that was extra or on top of what they already had to do. If we were a part of the education, of the Department of Education, and outdoor school runs like an out of school science time, but is still not really tied to our Department of Ed, it would be so much easier. So I would say, what does your environmental literacy plan look like? If you have one, is it funded? Is it mandated? Do they have staff to help? Because as someone who's only focused on 2 grades, it would help us so much more if students were getting experiences throughout their career, so that when they get to outdoor school, we don't have to deal with some of our students who they and their families are kind of worried about. What does a residential program look like? Or even if it's non-residential, because we've never had this experience before, and the first time we're going outdoors is in 5th and 6th grade. And then after they have this wonderful experience, they go back to school and then nothing happens again. And so like 7th through 12th grade, what does that look like? And so to connect it under the umbrella of a literacy plan, I think is really important.
You know, the background of the environmental literacy plans was the No Child Left Inside Act, which not long ago had bipartisan support at the highest levels at a time when nothing had bipartisan support. And sadly, after 2 attempts, it never went through and never passed. But I would like to think that something of that shape and form, not to say it all needs to be top down, but could live to see another day. And that our elected officials, even on a state level, which is kind of what Charissa just spoke to, is like, even maybe it's not at the federal level, maybe it's at the state level. Your state decides to go out in front and say, this is a priority to us. And I love the idea of public-private partnerships. And if you have a state, which, I mean, West Virginia, I mean, biggest news in a long time has been in the last few weeks in West Virginia with a lot of private investment. And is your state going to be there if that opportunity comes knocking? Have they been educated? Does the Department of Education or Public Instruction say, we're ready, we want to incorporate that? Maybe we need the funding, or maybe we need to make sure that the political buy-in is there. But I couldn't agree with you more, Charissa.
Awesome. Well, we'll try to get one more quick one in here before the end. But I want to come back to the equity piece that multiple of you all have brought up. Because when a lot of people start talking about equity and inclusion in outdoor programs, when you're talking about youth, schools are often one of the first places people go. Why do you think that is? And do you think that school programs are the best strategy to address this? And what considerations have y'all seen to make school programming truly accessible and equitable?
I'll jump in. I'd really love to hear WVU's take on it, just as someone who's made a big investment in working with the schools.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, Lauren, you're talking about like the schools as in like the state schools, right? Like public schools.
Well, some people say, like, well, we're going to work with public schools because that's what we're going to do. Or we're going to work with every school that we can, because that in many ways is often perceived as the first point of equity versus like, we're just going to do family programs. Like that is sort of a comparison to our next panel that'll be coming up in just a couple minutes here, our next sessions, that'll talk about that outside of school time. So why focus on the school time when you're thinking about equity? How does that resonate for y'all in our last 2 minutes?
Yeah, the schools have decades of practice at ensuring that they're able to provide every student with an equitable option. And so partnering with those experts, partnering with special education units, partnering with the people who already do it best, I think is a no-brainer when it comes to ensuring that we're able to provide an equitable experience. And like Charissa was saying, they know what accommodations they need and they can ask for those. So you're not starting over. You're not waiting for someone to come to you and say, hey, here's this issue that I have. Can you respond? The schools have an answer. They know what they need and they can come and they can say, here's the particular tool that I need, or here's the particular environment that this particular student needs to succeed. And so it's a natural fit. There's already experts in that system. And we found great success in following their guidance and leadership. And I feel like, yeah, it's a logical place to start. Was that the answer you were looking for?
Sure. And anybody else want to pop one more thought in our last minute here?
So I'd be happy to add to that. So I think that as part of in-school curricular education, which when students attend Science Adventure School, that is part of their in-school, curricular piece. It's part of their school day. It is an overnight field trip in a sense. But I think the reason that folks look to schools is that at least relevant to what our state suffers from and the struggles that we have to overcome is that in school space, that's our safe time. And that could be arguably the only time that we're going to have access to those students who don't have the at-home family support. It's an interesting demographic, West Virginia is, with many challenges. So I think that's part of the way. And then I think some uniqueness of our institution is that WVU being a land grant university, it almost becomes seen as like the outward face of just an open resource where citizens throughout the state can come to us. And so I kind of think that's where we kind of mesh up and find a medium between the two.
Awesome. Well, I know there's so much more to dig into everything related to schools. And I hope that for those of you joining us at home, reach out to all of these folks, go through the Hoover app, connect, chat. There's so much more to talk about. But I want to thank all four of you for your time today, for sharing this. And Ryan, I want to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much.
Y'all, it's been an absolute pleasure. Like, this panel, y'all are literally changing the future of our communities by changing the future of our people, right? You're literally helping our youth understand their worlds in ways that a lot of folks just would never have a chance to do. And that means so much. Like, as a person who has a daughter who's coming up into school in a little while, long while, but still a little while, right? Like, I'm stoked for her to have this in her world, right? And I think every person should hope that their children have this in their communities. And if they don't, you need to talk to y'all and figure out how to do it. Because seriously, like, it's beyond time. So thank you. You're all pioneers. We cannot thank you enough. And this is just a packed day. We've got an amazing things ahead of us.